What's going on, everybody? It's YG here, and welcome back to another episode of Sleeper Sunday. So Sleeper Sunday, for those of you that don't know, is a series I came up with showcasing fun hidden decks you may not know about that can deal quite a bit of damage in the proper hands. We'll be going over a basic deck list, strengths, weaknesses, what can be done to make the deck better, and of course a few replays to see the deck in action. And in today's episode, we're going to take a look at the winner of this month's poll, Mayakashi. So Mayakashi is a combo-focused archetype of zombies with varying attributes that utilizes the graveyard like a lot of zombie decks do, but it focuses a lot more on special summoning from the graveyard than any other aspect. They debuted in Hidden Summoners back in November of 2018, with the most recent support actually coming out in Magnificent Mavens in November of 2022, meaning that technically the newest support for this archetype that we will be using is not currently out in the TCG as of filming this, but it's my show and I'll do what I want. They have a Synchro and Link focused extra deck that revolves around climbing up in Synchro level and Link rating for their playstyle, typically going through at least one of each boss monster in their extra deck per turn. So Mayakashi is actually a pretty decently known archetype, though it never really saw too much competitive success. It is known for a couple of things, typically for having an FTK back on release, with Soul Absorbing Bone Tower and Zombie Master and stuff, which is why you probably saw it on screen a second ago, though it was really terribly inconsistent. And it's also known for being one of the many rogue decks that dies to a singular hand trap. This can be seen in the form of Hajun, the Winged Mayakashi, which is their first monster. He is a level 1 zombie that says if he's normal or special summoned, you can special a Mayakashi from your deck except another Hajun. You can only use this effect of Hajun once per turn, and you cannot special summon from the extra deck except Mayakashi monsters. So this is your main starter that you want to see in almost every actual hand, but the main problem is that because he is so important, a single Ash, Imperm, Veiler, etc. can completely ruin your day, because its main focus is to get out Daki, which is arguably the most important monster in the deck. Why is this, you may ask? Well, that's because you can only control one Daki, the Graceful Mayakashi. When a Mayakashi monster is special summoned to your field from the extra deck, while this card is in your graveyard, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card, and you cannot special summon from the extra deck to turn you activate this effect, except Mayakashi monsters. So she is level 2 and one of the only tuners in the deck, and you really want to get her into your graveyard before you start doing any of your actual plays, or at least get her on the field so you can start making your plays, simply because if you take a close look at the text, you'll see there is no once per turn anywhere on this card. So essentially your main play is you want to normal summon Hajun, use his effect to special summon Daki, and then you want to start synchro climbing into your 3, 5, 7, 9, etc. Because every time you synchro summon or even link summon, Daki is going to trigger in your graveyard to summon herself back. She's the main power piece for the deck that allows it to actually function and do its climbing aspect, but it is part of the bandwagon that the deck actually has, in that it locks you into Mayakashi monsters from the extra deck. It's a very brutal lock, as you will see, because it prevents you from using actual generic zombie good stuff, and it is present, unfortunately, on every single Mayakashi monster, which makes it very frustrating to actually use. Not so good is Daki's ugly twin sibling, Tsukahagi, the poisonous Mayakashi, who is also a level 2 tuner. He has the same restriction that you can only control one of him, but he says if a Mayakashi monster in your possession, except Tsukahagi, is destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect while he's in your grave, you can special summon him with the exact same lock, which I will no longer point out because all of them have it. So Tsukahagi isn't bad per se. He's very good in your grind game, especially in turns 2, 3, 4, etc. Because chances are, because you are playing Mayakashi, your stuff's going to get broken pretty easily. But he doesn't provide almost any actual plays on turn 1, except for, maybe if your Hajun gets Ghost Ogred, I guess. Compared to Daki, at least. And so you do want to play at least one of him because he is an alternative tuner, but he's nowhere near as good as Daki by far. There's also Shafu, the wheeled Mayakashi, who says on summon you can target a Mayakashi in your graveyard except Shafu, special in defense and negate its effects. That is kind of annoying that it negates its effects, ignoring Hajun being negated, which I feel like it might be there for that. It also prevents all of your synchros from actually triggering, which is kind of annoying because their main purpose is that they want to be special from the grave to trigger their effects. And Shafu doesn't allow that to happen, but it is decent in the grind game to actually start going back into your plays in case you were interrupted, but that really is all he's good for, which is why we only play one. We have Yasha, the Skeletal Mayakashi, who is a level 5 that says you can discard another Mayakashi to special him from your hand as a hard once per turn. He's okay. He's mainly just there to get some things like Daki into the graveyard, but overall his level is a bit awkward because you can only go into your high-end synchros if you actually get your Daki and such out, and he doesn't really do anything on his own. You have to also have something you can usually normal summon, and so that makes him really annoying to use sometimes, but he is an extender which the deck desperately needs. So for the longest time, these were actually the only Mayakashi monsters. However, that changed in Dark Neostorm when they actually received Yuki Musume, the Ice Mayakashi. So this is another level 1 that says if you control a Mayakashi card other than Yuki Musume while it's in your hand or graveyard, you can special summon it and then send a zombie monster from deck to grave, and you can only use this effect of Yuki Musume once per turn. So this card actually changed a lot for the archetype, not only because it's an extender from hand or grave, but also because it is level 1, meaning that if your Hajun gets hit by something like an ogre, you won't have to worry about not having your level 1 to start climbing, but it also dumps any zombie from deck to the graveyard, not only allowing you to dump something like Daki or Tsukahagi, but also allowing you to actually access your zombie good stuff, which we do play a good chunk of. She was a huge step in the right direction for the archetype, and while she is the only new monster that they have received so far, it is a welcome one to be sure. So that is it for the Mayakashi monsters themselves. We do have a few generic zombie good stuff monsters. With a playset of Uni Zombie, it is a zombie archetype, and it revolves around synchros, and so Uni Zombie, while he's not typically going into your synchros too often, because his level modulation can be awkward if he's the only monster on board, he does get things out of your hand and out of your deck into the graveyard, which is always welcome in this deck, especially things like Mizuki, because this does have a very heavy graveyard special summon focused playstyle, which you will see when we get to the synchros. Mizuki is very welcome in the deck as well. We have one Gozuki as sort of an alternative Uni Zombie, and also he's pretty decent to dump and send off of other things to get a free special from hand. We have Necroworld Banshee, which is part of the very small Zombie World package we do play. It's sort of an alternative win condition if you can't get to your actual win condition. You have Plague Spreader Zombie, which is an alternative level 2 tuner that also can get brick cards like another Daki out of your hand. Jacko Bolon is awesome for the strategy, serving sort of like Yasha, but being able to discard any zombie, and also being able to have a quick effect revive for any zombie in either graveyard, which is really strong for the special summon from Grave Focus playstyle. We have one Doom King Ballardrock, again as the alternative win condition, and we have one copy of Eldritch the Golden Lord because he is some pretty nice spot removal and a very large body. Finally, the only hand trap we run is 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring because it is a zombie and will allow you to get a lot of advantage because you can banish it for cost for some of your good effects. So that's all for the monsters. They actually do have some background to get into, starting with 3 copies of Mayakashi Return. Mayakashi Return is a Rota for the archetype, taking any Mayakashi card, be it monster or back row, except Mayakashi Return, and either adding it from your deck to your hand or sending it from deck to the graveyard. You can only activate 1 per turn, which is unfortunate, but it is very strong, especially for a card that we will get into, which actually makes the deck playable, but it's also an easy way to get access to Hajun. We also have 2 copies of Mayakashi Winter. So Mayakashi Winter, I believe, came out with Yuki Musume. Yeah, it says Dark Neostorm right here. So it says monsters your opponent controls lose 100 attack and defense for each Mayakashi with a different name in your graveyard. And you can only use one of the following effects once per turn. And only once that turn, sorry. So you can send this card and a Mayakashi monster you control to the grave to draw 1 card, and you can banish it from grave and a zombie monster as well to target a Mayakashi monster in your grave and special summon it. So all 3 effects are actually pretty solid on this card. The stat drain is very nice considering that this deck has very poor actual removal in the archetype, other than, 2 cards which we will get into, which only have destruction removal, so things that have targeting or destruction protection can be very rough to deal with. The draw power is always welcome as well because it does get things off your field and into the grave. It can be pretty annoying to have to send from field instead of being able to dump from hand, which would be really nice for something like Daki, but you win some, you lose some. And then banishing any zombie from your grave, remember this can include Ash, to revive any Mayakashi in your grave, which can include your Link monsters, which is really good in the grind game, is really nice as well, especially because you do want to be spamming the stuff from your graveyard. The 1 copy of Zombie World is also here for the Zombie World package to wrap it up. We play 1 copy of Card Destruction, so I think Card Destruction is pretty neat in the archetype because it is a zombie deck and you do want to get a lot of the stuff out of your hand into the graveyard, especially if you draw your things like Necroworld Banshee, Mizuki, even Gozuki in certain situations, Ballardrock, Plague Spreader, even Daki. Plus, it can always refresh your hand, which is really nice, and then it also can hinder the opponent depending on what they're playing, or if you're in a situation where they have a bunch of good stuff in hand that you want to get rid of. 1 copy of Foolish Burial and Monster Reborn, because it is a zombie deck, is enough to wrap up our spell lineup. And now we will get onto the trap lineup and the sole reason why you can actually play Mayakashi as a deck. So we have 3 copies of Ghost Meets Girl, a Mayakashi in Shiranui's Tale. So this card simply says tribute a Mayakashi or Shiranui Synchro or Link monster. Neither player can special summon monsters from the hand, deck, or extra deck for the rest of this turn. I mean, have fun, I guess. So the main goal of this was to make Mayakashi, have its graveyard focus, special from graveyard focus, I should say, shine a lot. But it ended up being one of the strongest lockout floodgates of all time, not only being a artifact scythe, but also being able to lock down the hand and deck, which screws over almost every deck in the entire game. All you have to do is open something like this in Hajun, or any combination of it and, or one of them and return, because return can add either of them, and you're basically set. To add insult to injury, it also says you can banish it from grave to target one of your banished zombie monsters and return it to the grave. And you can only use one effect of Ghost Meets Girl, Mayakashi, and Shiranui's Tale effect per turn, and only once that turn. So not only are you able to lock them out of almost every summoning condition ever, but it also puts things back like Mizuki and the Link 3, which we will showcase in a second, which is crazy for getting a bunch of resources back, meaning that you'll basically guaranteed have an OTK for the next turn. This card is kind of ridiculous and something that people are actually buying out Mayakashi Return over, because even like a deck like Zombie World can probably play a small Mayakashi engine and get away with running Ghost Meets Girl, which can be very, very toxic. So yeah, without this card, I don't think Mayakashi would even be able to make it onto Sleeper Sunday, but it does give it an actual win condition other than just climbing into a level 11 Synchro and getting Kaijun. Finally, we have a single copy of Mayakashi Metamorphosis that says you can discard a card to target one of your Mayakashi monsters that is banished or in your grave. Especially, your opponent cannot target with card effects this turn, and you're locked out of the extra deck aside from Mayakashi's, and you can only activate 1 Metamorphosis per turn. So it's just an alternative way to get one of your guys out on your opponent's turn at least, and it also can get brick cards out of your hand. And the nice targeting protection is pretty cool as well, especially when you have some beefier bodies that you don't want to be able to get run over. So yeah, that rounds up the main deck. It is a bit clunky, honestly, and I did make this myself, which you can probably tell. I'm not the best when it comes to deck building without some sort of template, but I did try my best, and it's been seeing pretty decent success overall. Like I said, it is a bit bricky because you are having to play some of the zombie good stuff, but without the zombie good stuff, it's just so vulnerable to hand traps and such. So to get onto the extra deck, which is actually one of their entire main focuses, we have Oboro Garuma, the Wheeled Mayakashi, Tsuchiguma, the Poisonous Mayakashi, Tengu, the Winged Mayakashi, Yoka, the Graceful Mayakashi, and Gashara Kuro, the Skeletal Mayakashi. I probably butchered every single one of those, but I'm sorry, I do not know the actual way to say them. But the reason I'm mentioning them all at once is because they all have actually very similar effects, just with varying levels and stat lines, and just with slight changes to some of their effects. So all of them have an effect to special from grave if a certain level Synchro monster or even Link monster is destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect while it's in grave. They get to banish another zombie monster from the grave to special them, so it's all for the level above them. So Oboro Garuma, being the level 3, will trigger when a level 5 is destroyed, Tsuchiguma will trigger when a level 7 is destroyed, Tengu a level 9, Yoko a level 11, and Gashara Kuro a Link monster. All of them say you can only control one of them, and they all have effects when they're special from a grave. Oboro Garuma says that all your monsters cannot be destroyed by battle, Tsuchiguma has all players mill the top 3 cards from their deck, Tengu pops a spell or trap, Yoko pops a monster, both of which non-targeting, and Gashara Kuro becomes a towers for the turn. So all of these are pretty interesting. In terms of importance, it probably goes like Yoko, Tsuchiguma, Tengu, Gashara Kuro, and Oboro Garuma. Battle protection isn't very necessary, especially when he himself is already 2100. Gashara Kuro becoming a towers is pretty neat, but it also prevents your stuff from affecting it, and also, it's just not the greatest thing. He's already big as is. Tengu being back row popping is very nice. Tsuchiguma milling the top 3 is great to put your zombie stuff in grave, and it can hinder the opponent in some situations. And then Yoko being non-targeting monster destruction is one of the best ones to summon on your opponent's turn, period. So as you can probably discern, you can just start climbing from Oboro Garuma all the way up to your Gashara Kuro, just from a single copy of Hajum, and then after that, you are going to start climbing into their Link monsters, starting off with the Link to Yuki Onna, the Ice Mayakashi. So she was the original Link monster for the deck with down left and down right pointing arrows, 1900 attack, and she requires 2 Mayakashi monsters. She says you can only control one of her, and while she points to a Synchro monster, your opponent cannot target this card for attacks. If a Synchro monster in your possession is destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect while this card is on the field, you can target a face-up monster on the field that's attack and defense become half its current attack and defense until the end of this turn, and you can only use this effect of Yuki Onna, the Ice Mayakashi, once per turn. So honestly, this card's kind of buns. Its effect is already really underwhelming, but the main part about it that does suck is that it requires strictly Mayakashi monsters. She can't just use generic zombies, which means that a lot of the time you will be stuck with some dead things on board if you get hand trapped like your Uni zombie, because it's not even like it requires at least one Mayakashi. You have to have 2 Mayakashis just to go into it, and so that is very obnoxious. And so typically you'll be starting your synchro climbing by normaling Hajime, specialing Daki, climbing all the way up into your synchros, using Gashara Kuro and Daki to go into your Yuki Onna, and then you can keep specialing Daki to climb up into your links because you just want all your synchros in the grave, and then your links are the actual boss monsters you want to end off on. So you'll almost never be ending off on Yuki Onna. We just play 2 so you can actually have an easy access thing. We do play 2 copies of Yuki Onna, the Icicle Mayakashi. All of these are Yuki Onna, by the way, just with like different cosplays, I guess. But Yuki Onna, the Icicle Mayakashi, is one of their new cards coming out in Magnificent Mavens. She's a Link 3 with all 3 down arrows and 2400 attack. She requires 2 or more zombie monsters, thankfully being more generic. She says you can only control 1 of her, and you can only use each of her following effects once per turn. If she's special summoned, you can target an effect monster your opponent controls and negate its effects. And then quick effect, you can banish it from grave to special one of your zombie synchro monsters that is banished or in your graveyard. So this card is huge for the archetype, less so for the imperm because they already have a better imperm in the form of their actual boss monster, which we will get to in a second, but mainly because she is a recurable quick effect special summon for any of your banished or graved zombie synchro monsters. Of course, you do want to special things like Yoko and Tengu and Tsuchigumo in the opponent's turn a lot, and so typically be using her effect after climbing up in your Link 4 while she's engraved, banishing to special one of them for a little bit of spot removal, and then something like Ghost Meets Girl can actually put her back into the graveyard, meaning you can use her again in future turns. Finally, we have Yuki Onna, the Absolute Zero Mayakashi. This is the main boss monster you want to end off on, sort of like a protect the castle or towers kind of strategy, even though she's not really a towers herself. You'll be climbing all the way up into your synchros and then through your links until you end on her and then like a Daki on board. Because she is a Link 4 with 2900 attack, left, right, down, left, and down right pointing arrows. She requires 2 or more zombie monsters. She says you can only control 1 of her, and negate any activated effects of your opponent's banished monsters, which is a floodgate effect I actually kind of forgot until now. So it's really nice against things like, I guess Thunder Dragon, but also anything that has effects that activate in the banish pile. And she says if a monster is special summoned from the graveyard, or a monster effect is activated in the graveyard except during the damage step, you can target one other face-up monster on the field, change its attack to 0, and if you do negate its effects, and you can only use this effect of Yuki Onna, the Absolute Zero Mayakashi, up to twice per turn. So ignoring how strong the floodgate can be in certain matchups, or even just against overall decent decks that may have 1 or 2 things that trigger in the banish pile, but the fact that she has an effect for a monster being activated or special summoned from either graveyard that can literally get you an imperm and drain the attack all the way down to 0 is very nice. Granted, it does target, but it is still pretty strong. That's why the deck does struggle with some things with targeting or destruction protection. As you'll see in one of the replays, I have a hell of a time trying to out-evil Hero Malicious Bane. But the fact that you can activate it twice per turn is very, very strong. It's not just like, a single once per turn activate and then get, fucked over if they have any sort of extension. You can actually trigger it multiple times per turn pretty easily, not just from you actually activating things like Yuki Onna, but also whenever your opponent activates things, especially in formats like currently where we have a lot of things that trigger in grave or get special summoned from grave. Sprite and Tier Limit do this all the time, and so Yuki Onna, the Absolute Zero Mayakashi, can't help you out there, but honestly, if you're playing against Tier Limit or Sprite, there's not much you can do anyway because you are playing Mayakashis. A couple alternative cards before we get to the replays. I used to play Glow Up Bloom in the deck. It was an easy way to access things like Baller's Rock. It can also add an Eldritch to hand. Overall, it's not really that great though. It is a level 1 tuner though, in case you are stuck with I don't know, some sort of weird monster on board that you really need to get off. Like maybe if you have a Mizuki and then you get the Glow Up Bloom on board, something like that. It also will give you access to things like 1-for-1, which is pretty strong. Pot of Avarice is also very nice. You do end up going through almost your entire extra deck within a couple of turns, and so being able to put them all back so you can recycle them and then drawing 2 is very strong. Ghost Meets Girl of Mayakashi's Manuscript. Ghost Meets Girl is like a little sub-archetype that Shiranui and Mayakashi actually share. This card is fine overall, but it requires a bit too much setup just to have an archetypal monster reborn. By the way, they actually don't have a basic archetypal monster reborn, which most zombie archetypes do, so I find that a bit weird. But it's overall just kind of unnecessary when you have something like Icicle Mayakashi. And then Mayakashi Mayhem is actually their other trap that we just don't really play. It says if a zombie synchro monster is special summoned except from the extra deck, so basically when it's summoned from grave or banish, even during the damage step, which is kind of weird. You can apply one of the following effects, but you cannot use that same effect for the rest of the turn. You can draw a card, set a Mayakashi spell or trap directly from the deck except Mayhem, send the monster with the lowest attack your opponent controls to the grave, your choice of Tide, or inflict 800 damage to the opponent, and you can only activate a Mayakashi Mayhem once per chain. So it actually has a lot of effects that you can use per turn, but it depends on you actually being able to trigger them all per turn, and some of them are kind of underwhelming. Drawing one card is pretty decent, and can get you something like Ash. Setting a Mayakashi spell or trap seems really good, especially with something like Ghost Meets Girl, but if it's turn 2 already when you have the Mayhem face up, you're probably not going to benefit too much from getting the Ghost Meets Girl in later turns. Setting them also with the lowest attack compared to the highest attack is kind of cringe, not gonna lie, because you'd have to use it like immediately, and then burning for 800 just doesn't really do much. So that is it for the deck list. Again, I did actually make this myself, and while it isn't the best, it is seeing a little bit of success, which you will see in the replays. Heads up, the replays aren't really the best, but I do have a really cool one against a hero player, which I will show first. And I'm gonna stop ranting for now. Without further ado, let's go ahead and see what this deck can do. Alright, so those were some of the replays that I managed to actually get with the Mayakashi deck. So I know, again, they aren't the best. I didn't actually get some great ones like I do for some of my other replays, but most people either would just scoop immediately, waste my time, and just sit there and just, like, forever and just burn out the clock, or they just weren't on to begin with. There's actually a lot of people that just leave the lobby as soon as they see the YGO in my name. Not to mention that I'm not supposed to show any of the times that I lose. But with those out of the way, I think we can finally start talking about the strengths and weaknesses of the deck. So starting off with the strengths, blatantly, Ghost Meets Girl is basically an FTK against most decks. You kind of just auto-win against like 99% of strategies by just resolving Ghost Meets Girl. Granted, that does mean you actually have to climb up into at least one synchro or link to actually utilize it, but if you can, and then you have any sort of follow-up next turn, you can usually go for a pretty good OTK unless they're running like a trap deck or something. Daki not being a once per turn is insane, and I understand that is for, like actually meant to be part of their strategy, like the synchro climbing stuff, and that is probably one of the main, if not the reason why you actually are locked into Mayakashis, because otherwise it'd probably be an insane engine in Zombie. But being able to access every synchro and every link in your extra deck in one turn to get them into grave for your effects is really, really strong. And without Daki, the deck would just absolutely crumble. You have some pretty easy to follow one-card combos in the form of like Hajun and Return, and even in some instances Unizombie, depending on what's in your hand. That are really easy to follow and really easy to perform. Granted, they are a bit fragile, but they are very simple and actually very easy to use. Again, it's just a fact of normaling Hajun, getting Daki from deck, and then just go synchro, 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 link, 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 done. As shown in the hero match, the deck actually has a really solid grind game as long as it can get up and running in the first place. It'd be better probably with things like Pot of Avarice in there to keep up with the grind, but being able to just infinitely revive stuff from grave to get pops, mills, things like that, big towers, they're all really strong and help the deck win in a lot of situations that it normally wouldn't. Again, that also has part of it to do with being a zombie archetype. You do get access to really cool things like Mizuki, which is, of course, awesome. And stuff like Zombie World and the Zombie World engine synergizes with the deck really well and can serve as an alternate win condition that can completely shut down certain strategies. Things like Sword Soul obviously really need Zombie World to not hit the board, things like Tri-Brigade, like anything that really requires the field and grave to be specific types. It also really hurts Flunder, of course, because they can only tribute summon zombies, which they don't play. So if you can't land on your Ghost Meets Girl stuff, you can typically at least end off with the Zombie World stuff, and if you're lucky, you can also have an absolute zero on board. With all those strengths out of the way, it's time to talk about the glaring weaknesses of the deck. So without a way to start climbing up into your synchros and your links, your hand is completely dead. Unless you're also able to instead get like the Zombie World package, which still isn't even that great depending on the matchup. You literally cannot do anything. Opening hands like multiple Daki, or getting your Hajun hand trapped, getting like Sukahagi in hand, or like Shafu with nothing in grave, Yasha with nothing to discard that's worth it. If you cannot access your extra deck, you are not winning that game. Speaking of the extra deck, it is incredibly tight due to the amount of synchros and links that you need. You need at least 2 copies of every synchro monster if you want to efficiently play the deck, unless you play something like multiple copies of Avarice. And like you have to play at least like 2 Icicle to get the best value out of her, 2 Yuki Onna so that you have some sort of follow-up, 1 Absolute Zero you can get away with because while it is a boss monster, it does have a little bit of recursion, but you basically have no room for any other things in the extra deck. But that leads us to the next problem, because that isn't much of a problem considering that you're locked into Mayakashi. The lock is just so punishing. It prevents even the simplest of zombie plays with things like Vampire Sucker or Fascinator. You're only able to access your Mayakashi monsters. And that wouldn't be a bad thing if the Mayakashi monsters weren't essentially only accessible by the Mayakashi monsters, which leads to another problem in that the deck is so fragile and dies to a single hand trap 9 times out of 10. Even opening like Hajun and Yuki Musume isn't enough to start going into your synchro plays alone. That'll only allow you to go into your links, which on their own don't really do much without the synchro part of the deck, unless you have Ghost Meets Girl in hand. Finally, your end board is very lackluster if you don't have Ghost Meets Girl or Zombie World Baller's Rock on board for extra disruptions. Typically, you might be able to get 1 or 2 revives on the opponent's turn, which can give you like a monster pop and a back row pop, or like a monster pop and a mill or something like that. But overall, it's just not really the greatest. You could just play a different zombie deck and usually get much better results. So with all that being said, how are we going to make Mayakashi better? So I think it'd be really cool if they broke the mechanic of Synchro a little bit. Similar to something like Ultima Zulkin that's treated like a level 1, but actually has a different level listed. Maybe they could have like a level 13 Synchro, because they go in odd numbers, right? They go 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. What if they got like a level 13 Synchro that actually has an on-field effect? Because one of the problems is that they don't really have much on-field effects aside from the Link monsters. Maybe it gets like a quick effect revived for a Synchro from your graveyard or something like that. Maybe some sort of protection from either targeting and or destruction. I think that would be really cool. I would also like to see more hand extenders, particularly tuners, or ways that can play through hand traps to start synchro climbing. Yuki Musume was an amazing step in the right direction, but not enough to actually keep the deck from crumbling, especially because it in itself is not a tuner. They do have a lot of stuff in the graveyard they can actually extend with, of course, being things like Daki, Mizuki, Plague Spreader Zombie, etc. But if you can't get your things into the graveyard, they don't really do much now, do they? I think it'd be really cool if they got a quick launch style spell to fetch something like Daki from the deck to play through hand traps as well. Perhaps locking you into Mayakashis from anywhere, like the graveyard and banish and things like that, so that you can't like access all of your zombie good stuff like Ball or Drock, but it's still being able to let you go into your main Mayakashi plays. More synergy with other zombie cards aside from like the old school Mizuki stuff, such like things like Yuki Onna only being able to use Mayakashis as well is very annoying and prevents synergy with things like Gozuki and Uni Zombie. I think just more synergy with other zombies would be really cool. I'm not saying that it's necessary, but maybe pull a Malefic and give them a card that instead of locking them into Mayakashi, changes the effect to lock them into zombies, making it so that it's still a lock so that Daki doesn't give you like infinite synchro and link climbing capabilities, but you can at least access things like Vampire Sucker and Fascinator in case, you know, you lose access to your main synchro and link plays, and you need to at least fall back on things, or if you want better going second plays with things like Fascinator. I don't know exactly how broken that would make it, or if it would make it broken at all, considering you are locked into zombies. I just think it would make it a lot better, and actually make Mayakashi a little bit of a splashable engine. But on that note, I do believe that is everything I have to say about the Mayakashi strategy. I think it's a very interesting strategy. I think it was very unique considering the other zombie strategies at the time. You mainly just had like Zombie World, the old Plague Spreader Synchro builds. It really just wasn't that great. And so this came along and actually innovated the strategy and let you play something unique and different. I think that was really cool, especially with the FTK, even though it was very inconsistent. Being able to mill your opponent's entire deck before something like Runic came out was very funny to me. I think the deck can have some really cool potential, especially with something like Ghost Meets Girl being a borderline bannable card if it wasn't locked into such bad archetypes, especially Shiranui. I'm probably never going to make a Sleeper Sunday on that. That's just unplayably bad. But that is just my opinion. Let me know yours down in the comments below, because that is going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as it helps put this video and the channel into YouTube recommended. And if you like this content, you want to see more like it, like the rest of my Sleeper Sunday series that I do every month, then perhaps consider subscribing, because we're on our way to 2,000 subscribers by the end of 2022. Hopefully we can meet that goal. I think it would be awesome. Remember that if you want to choose the next deck for Sleeper Sunday, I will have a poll at the end of every single month where I will have a few options that I have available listed, and it's a very temporary poll. It only lasts a limited amount of time, so get your votes in then, and always be on the lookout in my community tab for that, which you can of course keep up with better if you are subscribed to the channel. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.